Honourable Darren Hughes.
Mr Speaker, I rise to support the second reading of this Electoral Finance Reform and Advance Voting Amendment Bill, and also the Parliamentary Service Amendment Bill, which we are considering cognately together this afternoon. So before I begin my remarks, can I acknowledge the Speaker that I have followed, Heke Parata, tomorrow to be legally honourable, and to wish her all the best for her, well, that was part of the joke, Mrs Adams. It was sort of the subtlety lost on her. I can see, but I think that obviously being a member of this committee has been very useful for her, because it has enabled her to elevate to much higher status and with her new ministerial elevation. So I do offer my congratulations to her as she takes up her new duties. So now, having praised her, let me move to immediately criticise a couple of things that she said. And it is true that there has been a high degree of cooperation and working together on this bill, but I think that when she criticised my colleague for pointing out some of the inconsistencies that have occurred, as though that was somehow unfair of him, I think that was just pushing the barrow out just a little too far, because it cannot be the case that when the National Party is in opposition they can say anything they like about matters to do with electoral law, and then when they're in government everyone else should just play nice. People should just play nice and play along with the rules of the government of the day, and pointing out any previous positions that have been held is just not cricket, was the impression that I got from her as she spoke. Because it is true that while we ought to be... Well, that was beyond doubt. If the Minister had to check, the Attorney-General had to check whether or not the Australians had lost the cricket to the English, it just shows how out of touch that man is. This has been clear for days and days and days. But he has done a Google check to find out that this has happened. He must have a function out of the community tonight where he has to talk small talk with people, and he thought, I must check whatever happened to that cricket. So he's taken the chance to do that, and congratulate him for it. Obviously, the matters of electoral law are ones where we would much prefer to see things settled. I was recalling during my colleague, the member for Dunedin North, was speaking, Pete Hodgson, pointing out that it was 24 years, almost as long as John Carter's career, that since the Royal Commission reported on the electoral system, and these are debates that have been going on for quite some time, and where there has been a period of settled agreement across the Parliament, I think that's where things have worked well. Whatever the merits or otherwise of the Electoral Finance Act, when the then opposition made an overt decision not to cooperate or comply with that law, to attempt to derail that law, of course that became difficult, just as this law would become unworkable if the opposition of the day decided that we were going to mount a campaign about making it as unworkable as possible. There has to be a degree of acceptance, cooperation, and a willingness to submit to not only the letter of the law but also the policy prescriptions that are in it. And so in that spirit, sir, I do join in the cacophony of praise that we're seeing for the Honourable Simon Power, because that has been a feature of the debate, and we're having to all have to line up, take our turn, praise Simon Power. And he pretends he's not listening to these things, but I know they're being noted down. And there'll be another forum at another occasion, not too far from now, where I'm sure these matters will be discussed in much greater detail. And I look forward to that occasion. But in all seriousness, I think the fact that Mr Power has set out with the overt strategy of getting the agreement and being prepared to give and take on some things, be prepared to signal things where the government wasn't prepared to move but did accept there was difference. And allow the opposition the space to do the same thing. The point Mr Hipkins was making, in his opinion, about the disclosure for anonymous donations at electorate level, he thinks the current rate of 1,000 is fine. This bill moves it to 1,500. That was part of a genuine negotiation between all sides of politics, and I think that has been most useful. Also, just to continue with the theme of people who have played a role, I think the Select Committee worked very, very well, and Amy Adams, the chair of that committee, does deserve congratulations for that, because she was able to within obviously just as a new member, was now chairing a committee on a very challenging topic, and did so extremely competently, fairly, and in a way I think that submitters who went away saying they hadn't been listened to, I think that would be unfair if that's the conclusion they drew. I think there was a genuine attempt to make sure. I can confirm that she read every submission because she had the first 2 questions to every submitter, so it was absolutely clear, sir, that the chair had had been very diligent in her approach, and we appreciated that, as we did with the chance to be able to make our point. So I think there's a lot of goodwill that is important, as reflected at the second reading stage, sir, and able to be placed on the record of the House. The areas that the Select Committee has reported back to the House different from the bill at first reading is in relation primarily to the third party caps and the limit on expenditure for third parties to participate in the democratic process, either in parliamentary elections or for those involved in referendums. And I do think this is very important. I heard Mr Hodgson make the observation that freedom of speech is a very important thing for every citizen to be able to enjoy. It's the basic principle of democracy, but it cannot be exaggerated into a position where people can purchase unlimited speech to the detriment of other people, to the detriment of other political players and other people being able to have their voice heard fairly and equally, because as we know, sir, our system says that every vote is equal, and that is the demonstrated way in which ballots are counted, and so it makes sense, sir, that there be some common sense regime around the amount of money that can be spent. I think, having just watched the midterm elections in the United States, there was phenomenal money spent, money that I think would even make the National Party's trustees of the Waitemata Trust, I think it would make even their eyes water at the amounts of money that was spent, including my candidates who weren't elected. The GOP nominee in the gubernatorial race in California spent over $150 million US dollars on her campaign, and whether she received the endorsement of the Minister of Justice is unclear. I'll need to check that in her electoral returns at the appropriate point, but there was a lot of money spent to lose. Mind you, as we've seen in this place, sometimes if you lose an election you celebrate as though you won it, but that's a debate for another day. Oh, sorry, the defeated candidate... Speaking of defeated candidates from Mana, I hear the Attorney General pipe up. Defeated in Mana and in Rangatahi. Who knows where he's off to next? He's sort of the Richard Prebble of electoral defeat. And that sense, we look forward to where he may well be heading. Maybe you could say to one of the Māori seats, actually. He enjoys inflicting electoral defeat on himself so much. I think the candidate for Te Tai Tonga or Te Tai Hauru could well be where he sees himself. Rangatahi is the seat to watch, he says. I'm sure the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Mrs King, will have a reasonably firm view on that matter. But, sir, the point about the caps that I was making was that it is important to make sure that there is a fair and understandable amount of money that can be spent on these things. And that's why we spend a lot of time talking about the equivalent of a retail campaign. Now, I don't think the cap should be so large as to allow the kind of mass marketing, retail marketing that, say, Briscoe's might allow. I mean, I think voters would be absolutely sick and tired if they were subjected to that much publicity for a constant amount of their time. So putting the caps in is important. The regulated period was an area where there was a lot of disagreement, and that's one of those things where there is political difference depending on what side of the House you happen to be occupying. But I think longer term, the only way around that really is to have a debate in New Zealand about the length of the parliamentary term, last considered by the country in 1990 with the referendum on a 4-year term, and also to consider whether a fixed date would be a more sensible way of handling our parliamentary arrangements. Our move to proportional representation 14 years ago has not resulted in unstable government. There has been government where people have had different views on the policy agenda, but that we have stable government under MMP, and I think those who had previously argued against fixed terms thought that our proportional system might not lend itself well to such an arrangement, but I believe it would, and that's something we should come back to. Finally, sir, can I finish in this remaining minute by saying that we are passing the second reading of the Parliamentary Service Bill. This was a definition that was designed by Dr Michael Cullen and which was roundly ridiculed by the then opposition at the time. Mr Brownlee picked it up as Leader of the House last year. We were determined to get not an interim but a long-term definition of funding entitlements for parliamentary purposes. This bill does it. I think it's very, very important that we've now resolved that issue about the use of parliamentary funding for legitimate constituency and political party parliamentary political party work, but obviously not being able to use to either campaign positively for one's own party or use taxpayer resources to campaign against another. So we've got the third party situation sorted. We hope we never see the exclusive brethren situation ever again in New Zealand. We've got a sensible regime around